Hello and welcome to another episode of Bear Does Film Club. We are carrying on from last week in a look at pre-MCU films, and in particular the Blade trilogy. Today you'll hear our thoughts on Blade 2.
Yeah, we had posted that we may have done Blade 2 and 3 as one film. As one review show. Because I expected, I think we both expected actually, that Blade 3 would be so bad that it might not necessarily be worth talking about.
Yeah, and you watched it, and
I watched it on Saturday, and we're recording this on Monday, the 21st of September. I watched it on Saturday, and you know what? It wasn't anywhere near as bad as I remember it being. So I'm plenty to talk about, even though it isn't necessarily up there with the other two. So
yeah,
it will get its
I've
own
not seen
show.
it yet, but
So we'll record a dedicated show for Blade 3. So yeah, today is Blade 2. A bit like Blade 1. I've not seen this in quite some time.
same.
Probably, to be honest, probably a similar time since I last watched Blade 1, because I have a feeling it was possibly a bit of a back-to-back double billing that I did for myself
I
back then.
don't think I've seen this in the era of Blu-ray. That's how long it's been for me.
I think it was in the era of Blu-ray. I don't know whether it was on Blu-ray. So, but I think again it was maybe about 2008-ish. Because I don't think I've seen it since then. So
First off, I will say I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it surprised me like Blade did last week. This was exactly as good as I was expecting it to be, while Blade was better than I was expecting.
Yeah, I think Blade, because it's so and it seems daft to say, it's so old now. And obviously, the comic book films, comic book TV series, you name it, has moved on so much that I think there was a natural assumption with the original Blade that potentially it just wasn't going to hold up. And I think actually it was surprising in the fact that it did. It was as we discussed in last week's episode. It has its own feel. It has some leftovers of the previous generation, and it's got signs of what's to come with the coming generation. Whereas I think actually Blade 2, again, we mentioned it last week. Blade 2 has some foreshadowing of what more mainstream Guillermo del Toro films are going to look like, because this was one of the earliest wide release del Toro films, especially English language del Toro films.
It very much has that recurring del Toro theme running through it, that the monsters aren't monsters, the monsters are people. But in this case, the people are normal vampires as opposed to super vampires.
Yeah.
Like, we create our own monsters, and that's definitely a del Toro theme, and it's definitely present here.
I think it was a nice way of looking a little bit further into the vampire society as well.
Yeah.
Obviously, you got an idea that there was something larger and grander in the first one, with its own dedicated history. With this, you got to see another side of it. Most of this film is set in Eastern Europe, in the Czech Republic,
and
directly picks up from where Blade 1 leaves off. Blade 1 leaves off in Russia, so there is a through line that basically Blade is making his way back across Europe from Russia, chasing Whistler, who has didn't die in the first film, because they had his death off screen, so they managed to keep him alive.
Question about Whistler.
Yeah.
Was he turned?
Yes and no, because I think he was so badly injured, and obviously they put him in that like stasis pod thing, that he had turned, but not full turned. I think he was like at that level that the female doctor in the first film, who doesn't make a reappearance in this, she doesn't.
But yeah.
But I think he was at that state, and obviously the medicine that she developed in the first film had been developed a bit further, so they managed to cure him.
Yeah.
Using that.
It's very much a film that came out after The Matrix.
Yep. Lots, way more leather.
Yeah.
Lots of coats. It was especially, it had a very Matrix 2 feel, actually. Although I don't think Matrix 2 had come out at that point. But there was certainly some parallels to the aesthetic. Oddly enough, for a Del Toro film as well, there's quite a lot of CGI. Because some of the fight scenes, he'd obviously wanted to give it a slightly more cartoony look to it, where there was some quite over the top moves and action, and so they dabbled with some of that CGI that the Matrix would have dabbled with in the time. It doesn't quite hold up. It stands out a bit more, even though obviously it's higher quality than what was in Blade 1. I think I don't think it was as wisely used, especially for someone who, as we've now seen, is probably more comfortable using practical effects in his films.
It's still some very good action sequences, I think, though.
Oh, I'm not saying the action was bad. I think the action was absolutely excellent. I think
especially Blade's coming back fight, much like in the first film, where he gets kind of put down and then gets to come back and fight. This one gives a similar fight against Ron Perlman's Vampire Nazi. And that was an excellent fight.
Excellent fight, as was all the stuff with Matt Goss from Bros. Is it Matt or is it Luke? It's one of the twins from Bros.
Yeah.
Which I remember at the time was a real like what the moment for anyone who remembered Bros from the 80s, to suddenly see one of them in quite a big film playing a major character as well. But I really enjoyed it. I think I remember when it came out thinking it was better than the original Blade, because I think it obviously had a bit more budget. It had a bit more money for special effects. It was glossier.
I think the general set upon view that Blade 2 is the best of the three.
Yeah, and I think on watching it recently, especially with I suppose the revelation really that Blade 1 actually holds up as well as it does. I'm not sure that Blade 2 is the best anymore. I think it's dated the most.
I've not seen Trinity like you have.
Because I have watched Trinity, but
I think Blade 1 and Blade 2 are as good as each other. But yeah, I also am slightly leaning towards Blade as the better of the two.
Blade feels a little bit more timeless. Like there's some music that is of its time, but as we mentioned last week, and that potentially it was one of my choices for a Teenage Kicks choice in our double feature series. But I think that the music that was chosen for Blade 1 kind of just almost fits the scenario rather than necessarily fitting the time. It felt like vampires would listen to slightly dark, heavy dance music while they were potentially I think in this film they take a lot of was it this film or is it Blade Trinity? Either way, there's some like vampire cocaine going around in one of the films. It's obviously just coke cut with blood.
I think that's Trinity.
Might be Trinity. So like the music sort of makes sense, whereas I think one of the things I noticed when watching this film, Blade 2, that is, that it was definitely of that era where American hip hop labels had suddenly gone, you know what, we need to spend some money on getting our tracks into popular films, and especially for a film such as Blade, which had more money than Blade 1, but wasn't necessarily a mega budget film. It was quite obvious that this music had been planted into it as opposed to being deliberately chosen for an aesthetic or something like that. It was very much of that Fast and the Furious sequels and the early sequels where they weren't making stupid money with The Rock in it and stuff like that, but the Fast and the Furious sequels and things like Torque, the motorbike cash-in rip-off of Fast and the Furious, all those films of their era that sometimes the hip hop made sense for the characters and the culture that was shown, but in this one it felt very much at contrast with what we
don't think it felt out of place.
I think there were some hip hop tracks that were fine. There was some, it was just like, I think if it was like when it was to go a bit filmy here, but when it was like diegetic music, so music from within the scene, or you could think it was from within the scene, from where like maybe they're in a nightclub or something like that. Fair enough. I think the music choice then was fine. It was when it was music like popular music, so a hip hop track used in place of having a score or a soundtrack. That's when it seemed a little bit more jarring for me, but
it worked for me. I mean, I grew up on films of that era, though.
But yeah, I mean, I think that might be it. It might just be that obviously, like it is of that era that you would have been an early teen when you first saw films like this and films of that era, of the early Fast and the Furious films and things like that, where this music would have been the right music for the time. And I think for me, the only thing that the reason it jars a bit is because I can see that it feels planted. It feels like it's just been inserted there to sell some records, as opposed to like I don't think Del Toro would have deliberately chosen those tracks not all the tracks. The ones that kind of you can pass off as being listened to by the characters, then yes. Which I'll have more to say about that in Blade Trinity, because there's quite a bit of to do with that in that as well.
You've got good performances all around in this film again.
Definitely. I'd say the weakest performance actually is from a young Walking Dead.
Norman Reedus.
Yeah. Who plays...
He does what he's meant to do.
He does, yeah. He does what he's meant to do. He's not like doing any more than he's meant to do. I think...
And if you find his performance annoying, I think it is by choice.
Yeah.
He's meant to be this irritating upstart.
I think it was one of those ones that felt a little bit too stereotypical in a way. It was very much like this is the one of, this is this guy. Like, whereas everyone else actually thought, because I think the quality of everyone else was so much higher.
I think you need him to be that way for the betrayal twist to work.
Mm.
You either have to really flesh him out
Mm.
so it hurts,
Yeah.
or you need him to be annoying so
Yeah.
you're happy with
Mm.
with him getting his comeuppance.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
Another interesting, not really a romance subplot through as well.
I think there was certainly more romance with this one than there was with Blade 1. And it was
Potentially feels one-sided, though.
Which side do you think it was?
Hers. I don't think
See, I think
Blade
it was
does
the other way
much
around. I
reciprocation.
think no, I read it more that it was Blade, to be honest. So maybe it's just maybe it was quite nicely done. So it's a perspective thing, because I actually thought there was way more romance in this one, and it might have been a case of both sides realizing that they could never actually act upon it.
Yeah.
Because Blade hates the vampires so much that how could he necessarily properly fall for this woman? But at the same time, he can still comfort her in her death.
I still think it's interesting, certainly not a traditional kind of what's the word I'm kind of looking for? Like a love plot through the film.
Yeah, because like again, I mean, obviously we've mentioned it in previous episodes, and that some of the films that Blade 1 reminded us of like say the cop thrillers like Die Hard or something like that. Some films of that era would certainly have a romance thread through them, like it just happens. And even Batman, like the 89 Batman has to have a romance thread through it, as does in fact all the three sequels to the 89 Batman film have to have a romance thread through it. So having a level of attraction and a level of I suppose appreciation, as opposed to it just being a romance or even lust. Because I mean, the thing is that like there's not even any, like, Blade doesn't ever have sex or anything like that. It's not like he's even Bond, where he's incapable of love but is capable of lust. It's it's quite refreshing take in a way, and it makes the female characters feel more significant.
Like he's dedicated to the job.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah, like a monk. Yeah, quite like that. I did, because I mean, I'm not a big comic book reader, so I don't know what the history of Blade is. Like, well, I don't know in detail.
Well,
I know where it comes from.
For the next episode,
Mm.
At the end of the episode, I'm going to try and read the first Blade's first appearance.
Well, it's actually in the film. The comic book that Blade first appears in,
Tomb of Dracula number 10.
Tomb of the Dracula is actually in the film, and Blade picks it up and looks at it. So, but we'll cover that in the next episode.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was actually that this, I know obviously in Marvel and DC, there's lots of crossover, and usually because an artist or a writer jumps ship from one to the other and stuff like that. So you get things like the Thanos and Darkseid similarities, shall we say. This, I don't know whether these characters were in the comic books or not, but they were very much the equivalents of Ra's al Ghul and the Al Ghul family.
You're about Hannibal King?
No, I'm on about no, because that's in 3.
Oh, you're on about? Oh, you're thinking.
I'm on about Blade 2. I'm on about with the vampire that he falls for with Nissa.
Oh, I think this is just very much they're vampires. I don't think they're comic characters. I could be wrong, but I don't think they are.
Because isn't one of the Al Ghul sisters Nissa?
There's an Al Ghul sister called Nissa, yeah.
Yeah, so I wondered whether maybe it was another one of those where, maybe we'll do the research for the next episode and we'll have.
It's the one Arrow used because we couldn't get Talia.
Yeah, until later on, and then Talia's in it. I'm sure she is.
I gave up by then, I think.
Yeah, it's the one Arrow uses, and it was just with that and the fact that she's the daughter of
an ancient vampire,
an ancient vampire, proper old one. To the
character.
point when he dies, he's got blue blood. His body has changed that much.
I very much like the villains in this. Both the monsters who are victims,
yeah,
and the ancient vampire who's the whole villain arc is quite nice.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of predictable, but it isn't bad predictable. I think there's a satisfaction to it, and I think again we've touched on the quality of performances. There's some really good actors in this, even the ones that aren't necessarily big names, like the actress who plays Nissa. I recognise her from something else, but I can't put my finger on it. And with the Bros brother, again, that was out of nowhere. That was absolutely out of nowhere. And he was superb, to the point that obviously he was cast in Hellboy 2 by Del Toro for a similar-ish character in that, really.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've already mentioned the Nazi vampire who went on to be Hellboy for Del Toro. So it really is part one of the Del Toro comic book film verse, really. Even if obviously they're not necessarily all canon to each other, but it's in a thematic universe, I suppose.
Del Toro likes making monster movies.
Yeah, he does, and I think
that's what he does.
Yeah,
it's weird in the fact that out of Del Toro's canon, the one that stands out the most is Pacific Rim as not fitting.
It is an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah,
because it's so much less about the monsters. There's big, ugly monsters in there, but aesthetically, it doesn't look like a Del Toro film. It doesn't it.
He potentially just had the Godzilla itch he wanted to scratch.
Might be. I got the feeling with that it was a film he was happy to do, but needed to do to get the financial backing for something else, which obviously ended up being The Shape of Water. I think it was a you scratch my back, I scratch yours, because the problem that Del Toro has had is that he's very much a starter but not a finisher. He'll take endless numbers of projects on and never actually get around to doing them. And so I do wonder maybe with Pacific Rim.
I don't know if that's fair, as much as there was just that weird period of time where it did feel like he was getting announced for a lot of things.
Yeah, and obviously sometimes, to be fair to him, it was announced as producer for it rather than director for it. But I think that it very much did feel for a while that it was like, oh, here's another film that he's not going to make.
He's got his animated Netflix universe, hasn't he, as well? That was 3 or 4 different series in now.
Yeah.
Starting with Troll Hunters.
I've not watched any of them, but
I've seen a bit of Troll Hunters. It was good.
Yeah. But yeah, I think on the whole, it certainly isn't the best of his comic book films.
Yeah.
And I think you could see that it was him making a film for a studio as opposed to him being fully free as well with this film. and obviously his quality was still there. There was, I mean, there's no doubt about it. It was actually at times quite polished, despite some choices to use some, as I say, to use some CGI that I think has aged worse
I
than
feel
they
like
might have thought. But
we're approaching the point in the discussion. So overall, your final kind of thoughts on Blade 2?
I still really enjoyed it. I think there's significantly more ups than there are downs, significantly more pros than cons. I would put it behind Blade 1 for me, having watched them in close proximity to each other recently. I think, and we'll cover this in the next episode, but I think actually the gap between Blade 2 and Blade Trinity is not as big as I remember it being.
Is that more the fact that Trinity is better than you remember?
I think it's probably more to the fact that Trinity is better than I remember, but I think there's certainly an element of I don't think Blade 2 is as good now as I did when I saw it in the cinema.
See,
when it came out.
I would put this and Blade 1 more on par, leaning towards Blade, but I think that's the surprise of being shocked by how good Blade was.
Again, I think it's probably the opposite for me with Blade 2, in that like there was an expectation that I thought this was the best, and then I don't think it is now. I think but it wasn't disappointing. So I mean, don't get me wrong, I wasn't disappointed with it in any way. I think because of that pleasant surprise of how good Blade 1 is and how well that's held up. Actually, I think that Blade 2 has almost been hurt by how good Blade 1 was.
I will say, I had to watch both in two sittings because I fell asleep. But that's more down to me deciding to watch a 2-hour film at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
As opposed to any comment on the quality of the films.
Yeah, I can go with that. I think similar to maybe the Alien films and the first two Terminator films as well. This definitely had that feel of it being more of an action film as opposed to it being a horror. I think Blade certainly is an action horror, whereas this is a straight out action film that just happens to be about vampires.
I will say it's left me with a desire to explore. We're still going to do pre-MCU films, but it has left me with a desire to explore other, for want of a better term, edgy films from the era.
Yeah, I get you. But stylistic edgy films. So I think we've mentioned off camera the Underworld films.
Bad films.
Well,
I like them, but they're bad.
Yeah, I think again I've not watched them in quite a long time. So, and I certainly haven't seen the latest one. So I think at some point we will go through the Underworld films. And whether they get an episode each or not, that will remain to be seen. One might be a collective. Anyway, to the score, James. I believe we both scored on the cold light of day scale. We both scored Blade 1 4 out of 5.
We did,
making it significantly warmer than the cold light of day.
I am also going to give Blade 2 a 4 out of 5, but maybe not as solid of a 4 out of 5. Okay. If you're one of those people who put points in...
See, I'm going to put a decimal in mine.
Decimals off of a week.
All right, I'll use fractions. For our American viewers, I won't use the metric system. So, To reiterate, The Cold Light of Day, the most mediocre, straight down the middle, and therefore
You know what
wrong, nothing
you know what
right.
decimals mean?
What?
You haven't got the courage of your convictions.
I don't have the courage of my convictions, James. So yeah, Cold Light of Day was a solid 3. It was so much of a 3 that it was one of the worst films we've ever seen. Yeah, it hurt. It hurt because there was nothing wrong with it. I don't think this is anywhere near as Cold Light of Day as Cold Light of Day, but I don't think it's quite as good as Blade 1. So I'm going to go with a 3 and 3/4 star review for Blade 2. So for the rest of the world, 3.75. So I was tempted with 3 4/5 actually. So yeah, we'll go with sod it. What we'll do is we're going to go for 3 4/5. I'll be nice. We'll go
3 and 4/5.
Yeah. So 3.8.
Let it be known. Bear in mind, the first film reviewers that use fractions.
I don't think we are.
No?
No.
I've never seen fractions before.
I've not seen them in films. I have seen them in wrestling reviews. So I'm sure there must be an American.
I'm going for it. First reviewers to use fractions. You heard it here first.
Fair enough. So next episode will be Blade 3. As we said in the last episode, we will certainly not be doing the television series. Not a chance. Blade 3 as well, or Blade Trinity, sorry, as we're watching it on Amazon, is the unrated US version. So in theory, is a few extra seconds of something.
And it's somehow longer than the other two. And is the longest of the 3.
Didn't feel it, oddly enough, when I watched it the other night. There's a very, very, very weird cut in it, though. About, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes in. That I know it's the unrated version, and therefore, in theory, a director's cut of sorts. But it very much feels like a cut they forgot to sort out, because it just, the mid-sentence just stops.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't finish the scene. It's not the end of the scene. It just jumps to a different angle, and then the scene finishes, and there's 6 or 7 seconds missing. So something happened there. Yeah. But for some reason hasn't made it to this cut. So
I'm sure we can discuss that next week. And we will see the folks at home next week to discuss Blade Trinity.
Yep, Blade Trinity. Coming up from Bear in Mind as well, we've got more gaming news for those who like games. There's been quite a lot going on. So we'll be shooting one of those this week.
I don't like games, but I've got to do the gaming news.
True. Yeah, I hate them. He says the PlayStation controller just over his shoulder. So but yeah, so we're going to be doing that, and then in a couple of weeks we debut our brand new season. But more on that possibly next week.
Yeah,
maybe announce it at the end of Blade Trinity. Until then, thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
I'll give you one hint, though. Get your balloons ready.
Get your balloons ready. That could mean anything.
See you next week.
See you next week. Like and subscribe.